Alright, good evening and welcome to another video. Today I will be doing a video on horror hosts. That's right, the reason why I'm speaking in that Romanian accent is because today I'm going to do a video on horror hosts. And the reason why I want to do a video on this subject is because recently, not too long ago, I got a chance to meet a horror host, one famous in the Chicagoland area, and that would be Sven Ghoul. Right here, as you can see, I got his autograph. He signed it. And, he's a really cool guy. Sometimes when you meet a celebrity, they could be nasty and not friendly, but that wasn't the case here. Sven Ghoul was really cool. Rich Coase is his real name. And he's been on TV since 1979. He's been Sven Ghoul. Initially, he was the son of Sven Ghoul. Then later on, he got permission from Jerry Jean Bishop to just call himself Sven Ghoul. But, yeah, I got a chance to meet him. And as you can see right here, and I'll show you, I'm wearing a Sven Ghoul t-shirt. Right here, so I've got my t-shirt as well. I've been a fan of Sven Ghoul for a while. I remember when I was a young kid, I had sent him a picture I drew and he mentioned it on his show, and I just thought that was really cool that he would do that. Well, yeah, I want to do this video because I want to talk about horror hosts, because it seemed that, at one time, every city pretty much had a horror host, and each city kind of thought they had the definitive horror host, that theirs was better than the other cities. And that was the case in Chicago, it was the case in other cities as well. The one state that really had a lot of horror hosts was Ohio. Ohio had quite a few. You had Gallardi in Ohio, you also had the Ghoul, but yeah, there were quite a few. In Pittsburgh, you had a horror host by the name of Zachary. And Zachary is usually regarded as like the definitive horror host. Like, he was the guy that was kind of like the blueprint. He laid down like the groundwork for what would, kind of pretty much be horror hosting for decades to come. A lot of different things. You would have cutouts of himself and they would be inserted into the films. You would have different sound effects. You would do different jokes. He had this sidekick that was this blob thing called the Amoeba. And he had a show that came on pretty late. And a lot of kids would watch it, but you ask, or if you listen to people who watched his show back then, and it was on in the 50s and 60s. And a lot of people watched his show knowing that they were kind of watching something they shouldn't be watching. Like, they would have to kind of watch it in secrecy, and then they would talk about it the next day in school. It was that kind of thing. They would talk about it the next day in school. Teachers didn't want to hear him talk about it. And, Zachary wasn't really something, teachers or parents wanted their kids to be watching, but, some people will watch it anyways. That's just how it was. A lot of people had to watch it in secrecy, like I said. But, yeah, in addition to Zachary, you had others. You had Vampira. She was also on in the 50s. Her show only lasted for about a year, if even that. And, she was on for a while. Now, what happened with her is supposedly she had won a contest. She was an aspiring actress. She, believe she lived in Oregon, and she moved to Hollywood to try to make it. And she entered a contest. It was a Morticia Addams lookalike contest, and she won it. And, this was before the Addams Family TV series, but it was a comic strip in the New Yorker at the time. So she won it, and some television executives decided to give her a show, make her a horror host, so she became a horror host and began, hosting various movies, and, in between, commercials and stuff, she would say a few things. And eventually what ended up happening was she was apparently friends with James Dean. James Dean died at the age of 24, and for some reason people kind of thought she was somehow responsible. I mean, she was a friend of his. I don't know why they would think this, but they also thought she might have been using black magic, and they thought her comedy was kind of racy. And, it was the 50s, and it was a time when, if you did anything kind of edgy, it might not have been appreciated, and it might have, really just like kind of wasn't the time for that. So eventually what happened is her show got canceled. Was not on for that long, but she did get other bit parts in various other films. She was even in Ed Wood's Plan 9 film, which came out in 1959. She had some parts in that. And, so she was a horror host on then. What happened was Universal Pictures had released 52 horror movies to stations throughout the country, and when they released these movies, they arrived with a booklet saying that these movies needed to be delivered with a horror host. So that's why all these stations would have horror hosts. Usually these horror hosts were like weathermen or, other people that had different jobs at the station, the TV station. And early on, too, you could tell a lot of these people had even begun in radio because they brought kind of this like Orson Welles kind of radio vibe to it. Who Vampira, by the way, was said to have had dated. But, so moving right along, you just had more horror hosts. A lot of different cities had them. Like I said, Cleveland had quite a few. Cleveland had Ghoulardi, who was pretty popular at the time. Later, the guy who played Ghoulardi would move to California, and he would do more voiceover work. I want to say he did the Love Boat voice, and he did other stuff for ABC. A lot of stuff back then. But, yeah, you had, then the Ghoul. The Ghoul was a protege of Ghoulardi, and then he had landed the position of horror host, and he kind of had his own thing. Initially, he was kind of a Ghoulardi clone, but then he started to come into his own and kind of do his own thing. He would, like, spray cheese whiz everywhere. You would blow things up with firecrackers. Have all the weird sound effects. Do, typical horror host kind of things. And he was pretty popular in Cleveland. His shows pretty much lasted, I think, over 30 years, on and off. On and off for like over 30 years. And it was syndicated. It was syndicated in like Detroit, where it was popular, in Chicago, where it was not popular, because Chicagoans wanted Svengoolie, and Svengoolie had been canceled at this point, and they weren't going to accept the Ghoul, so the Ghoul didn't last too long in syndication in Chicago. But briefly it was on in Chicago. So, yeah, just a lot of different horror hosts. He had some in California as well. You had one back in the 70s. I believe he had a show, I want to say it was called Fright Night. And this individual, he was on for a while. And Sinister Seymour was his name. And he was on for a while. Then he died, I forgot of what, but he died fairly young from what I understand. And he was replaced, but he wasn't replaced until a few years later in the 80s when Cassandra Peterson took over. And Cassandra Peterson is probably the most famous horror host of all time. That would be Elvira. But, Elvira had a show, lasted a few years, but she really became famous from all the, like, advertising she did, just advertising different products and that. And there was an Elvira movie, and there were, comic books. She became famous that way, and the show was in syndication for, I believe, about 7 years. And then eventually it was brought back around 2010. The other one I do want to talk about, of course, is Svengoolie. Svengoolie started out, he was on in the 70s, played by Jerry Gene Bishop. Kind of had sort of a, I would almost call it kind of like a hippie zombie look. Kind of looked like Rob Zombie in a way. If you watch some of these Jerry Gene Bishop Svengoolie clips on YouTube, and I recommend you to do that because it's not dated. He was pretty funny. Jerry Gene Bishop was funny as Svengoolie. The jokes were pretty good. And, he had all the things that, the other Svengoolie Rich Koz would do later on. The Berwyn references and the sound effects, the same kind of sound effects. So, Jerry Gene Bishop, I recommend checking his stuff out. From what I understand, he died not too long ago. But, he was pretty funny as Svengoolie. And then, apparently what had happened was Rich Koz was writing into the show and giving Svengoolie, Jerry Gene Bishop, material. And he would use a lot of the material. So, when Svengoolie moved on to another position in the station, he recommended Rich Koz to be the new Svengoolie. Rich Koz became the son of Svengoolie, and he had like a different look. This kind of look that you see right here. Sort of like an Alice Cooper look, in a way. I think he even has a story of being mistaken for being Alice Cooper, from what I understand. But, so, Svengoolie is still on today. He's kind of been on and off over the years. Now he's on MeTV. He's on other stations as well. But, just quite a few horror hosts in different cities. Another one I want to mention is you had some others in Philadelphia, actually. Philadelphia. You had Stella and Hives, Butler Hives. That was a show called Saturday Night Dead, and that ran from 84 to about 1990. And you could find some of the stuff they did, and that was seemed like kind of an interesting show. Again, it was on in Philadelphia, and I don't live there, and these things are, very local, which is the reason why, like I said, a lot of people think they have the definitive horror host. Theirs is the best, because they were very local. But Saturday Night Dead. And Stella, I guess, she wasn't like an undead person or a vampire or anything like that. But, she just, was kind of, I guess maybe kind of a strange personality in a way. But, definitely something to check out if you could come across some of those clips of Saturday Night Dead. Just quite a few. You also had Sir Cecil Creep, I should mention, and he was in Tennessee, in Nashville. He was on for a little bit in the 70s, and then later on, he came on, I want to say, late 80s, early 90s on the Nashville network. But, you had him as well. So just, all these cities had different horror hosts. But like I said, Zachary is usually regarded as like the definitive one, like the one who kind of set the tone for what horror hosting would be. You had another one in Chicago, an individual by the name of Marvin, and he was kind of like a beatnik gimmick. He was on in the 50s, and Jerry Gene Bishop even talks about watching him, and I guess his gimmick was how he had a wife who he called Dear, but you never actually saw her. And you only saw her when she turned around in the last episode and said bye. And that was it. And it was really the actor's wife. It was really Marvin's wife. So, that's all I've got. I just wanted to do this video on horror hosts. because I've been thinking about it. You know, not really too many right now. I mean, it's kind of changed. I mean, there's Mystery Science Theater 3000, and that really had kind of the feel of like the next evolution of the horror host when that was on. That's what I thought when I first saw it. Like, you know, the horror host thing had evolved, and now it's Mystery Science Theater 3000. It really has that feel to it. But today, you know, hard to say what you really have, I guess. You do have some stuff on YouTube. I know there's Comic Book Girl 19. She does some stuff that's very horror host-like. You know, she has characters on it, like that robot in Space Brain. So it has the feel of being kind of like a horror host show. So, yeah, that's all I've got. If you've watched this video, as always, have a good night. Or should I say good evening.